Okay, let's dive into this, because I know exactly what you're thinking. That quote, it sounds completely made up, like something straight out of a cheesy science fiction movie. But it's not. This is a direct quote from a heavily classified report by the Defense Intelligence Agency. The absolutely wild reality of our modern history is that, right at the peak of the Cold War, the US military and intelligence communities actively funded, researched, and literally utilized psychic spies. Yeah, you heard that right. Psychic spies.
Welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly excited to guide you through this material today. Now, to be clear, our goal here is totally impartial. We are not here to try and convince you that humans can definitively float through walls or predict the future. Instead, we're going to unpack the bizarrely dense, fascinating science that the military actually used to justify Cold War psychic intelligence programs. We're looking strictly at the declassified documents and the historical record to see exactly how they explained the seemingly impossible.
So the crucial point is that while we are exploring some truly esoteric quantum mechanics today, we are following a highly structured path right back to real-world intelligence history. Here is exactly how we're going to break it down. First, the psychic spy secret. 2. Monroe and brainwave synchronization. 3. Holograms and the absolute. 4. Focus levels and remote viewing. 5. The Cold War psychic race. And finally, number 6, the legacy of Stargate.
Part 1. The Psychic Spy Secret. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just the sheer, formal, bureaucratic nature of the document. This is the actual table of contents from a 1983 report titled Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process. It was written by U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonald. McDonald was quite literally tasked by his commanding officer to assess a consciousness-altering program called the Gateway Experience. And to do this, he didn't just lean on mysticism. He used biomedical models, quantum mechanics, and physics. He essentially took these trippy, mind-bending theories of human consciousness and translated them into cold, hard military jargon. And a fun fact, for years, one single page of this declassified document was mysteriously missing, which, as you can imagine, fueled endless public intrigue before it was finally uncovered online.
Section 2. Monroe and brainwave synchronization. See, the military didn't actually invent this process. They evaluated a pre-existing system created by a guy named Robert Monroe. Monroe was a radio broadcasting executive who, starting around 1958, began having what he termed out-of-body experiences. This deeply changed him and led him to found the Monroe Institute strictly to study human consciousness. And the absolute bedrock of his system, and the primary reason the military got so interested, is defined right here: hemisync. Because of his radio background, Monroe loved experimenting with audio. He figured out that if you play a very specific frequency in one ear, let's say 170 Hz, and a slightly different one in the other, like 174 Hz, your brain doesn't just process two separate sounds. It actually creates a third, internal, beat frequency that makes up the exact difference, in this case 4 Hz. And 4 Hz just so happens to be the precise frequency of theta brainwaves, which are closely linked to deep sleep and profound relaxation.
This whole trick relies on a really neat biological mechanism known as the frequency following response. Basically, the human brain will naturally try to mimic the frequency pattern it hears. The gateway system totally used this to their advantage. By feeding these barely audible beat frequencies through stereo headphones, and usually masking them with the ambient sound of crashing ocean waves, they could essentially force the left, logical hemisphere of the brain to totally relax into a sleep state. Meanwhile, they kept the right, intuitive hemisphere highly alert, effectively bringing the entire brain into a state of coherent, complete synchronization.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real effect of that synchronization. Melissa Jaeger, who was a trainer at the Monroe Institute, famously compared the normal waking brain to a lamp. A lamp throws out light and heat, sure, but that energy is chaotic, it's diffuse, and it just kind of lights up a wide area with very little depth. But a brain in hemisync, that operates like a laser. It produces this incredibly disciplined, highly focused stream of coherent energy. The Gateway Report theorized that once the brain is operating like a laser, its energy can be accelerated to resonate with the universe in entirely new, profound ways.
But hey, it wasn't just about the brain. Deep sleep-like physical relaxation also plays a massive role in this whole process. The military report notes that when your body is profoundly relaxed, the heart's bifurcation echo, which is literally the bouncing back of blood pressure in the aorta, starts to fade away completely. And as a result, the entire body starts to vibrate coherently as one single system at exactly 7 to 7.5 Hz. And here's the crazy part. Astonishingly, this specific frequency entrains perfectly with the Earth's ionospheric cavity resonance.
The document seriously suggests that this actually makes the human body an ideal, world-spanning medium for conveying telepathic signals. Talk about catching some good vibes, right?
Moving right along to Section 3, Holograms and the Absolute.
So, according to the McDonald report, which draws heavily on the biomedical models of Itzhak Bentov, solid matter doesn't actually exist, like at all. Everything we see is just oscillating energy grids. The entire universe is described here as a gigantic, extraordinarily complex hologram. Think of it like dropping a handful of pebbles into a completely frozen pond. The interacting ripples of moving energy crossing over resting energy create a 3D interference pattern. Well, according to the report, the human mind is also a hologram, and in its highly focused, laser-like hemisync state, it can theoretically attune itself to the universal hologram, allowing a person to intercept information directly from the universe itself.
But, how does consciousness actually travel to see distant locations, or even move backward or forward across time? Well, the report leans on a mind-bending aspect of quantum mechanics called Planck's distance. When an energy wave oscillates, it has to hit a microscopic point of total rest before changing direction. When the brain's wave frequencies are accelerated enough, the physical distance of this oscillation drops below 10 to the power of -33 centimeters. According to the theory, at this infinitesimally small distance, the energy briefly clicks out of our physical time-space dimension and literally enters a state of infinity. The idea is that if a human mind can string enough of these click-outs together, consciousness can theoretically transcend the physical boundaries of space and time entirely.
Section 4. Focus levels and remote viewing.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an actual repeatable methodology. Because the Gateway tapes didn't just throw you in the deep end, they guided participants through very specific progressive steps. First, visualizing an energy conversion box to mentally lock away all your physical world worries, which, let's be honest, we could all probably use on a Monday morning. Then comes resonant tuning, which is a physical humming designed to vibrate the head and body. Third, creating an energy balloon that flows around the body for mental protection. Mastering these steps led the participant to a foundational altered state called Focus 10. In Focus 10, the physical body is completely, entirely asleep, but the mind is perfectly awake and highly synchronized.
Once subjects got comfortable there, they unlocked some seriously advanced techniques at a higher state called Focus 12. We're talking things like patterning to actually manifest desired outcomes, or using an imagined energy bar tool for physical healing. But take a close look at that second-to-last bullet point, remote viewing. Participants would essentially take their energy bar tool, turn it into a whirling vortex, and send their imagination flying through it to acquire illuminating insights from physically distant places. This very specific application, the ability to gather real-world information far beyond the reach of physical human senses, became the ultimate portal for military and intelligence interest.
Which brings us to Section 5, the Cold War psychic race.
You have to understand, this wasn't just a brief fringe fad that popped up and vanished. The US and the USSR were locked in a literal psychic arms race. Both sides were absolutely terrified that the other would gain an undetectable, completely indefensible strategic advantage. After getting wind that the Soviets were heavily researching extrasensory perception, the US military formally evaluated the Monroe Institute in 1978. They eventually authored the Gateway Report in 1983 to validate the physics behind it all. And this deep, very real interest sustained continuous, classified intelligence programs that weren't officially shut down until 1995.
These government initiatives operated under super-secret code names like Project Grillflame and Project Sunstreak. And they weren't just sitting around reading quantum theories, they were running actual operational missions. Using gifted subjects completely trained in remote viewing, the military reportedly successfully located a crashed aircraft within just 15 miles of its actual hidden location. In another famous instance, early remote viewing pioneers accurately visualized highly detailed insights into a top-secret Soviet research and development facility at Semipalatinsk. The appeal for the CIA and military was incredibly obvious. The only equipment needed was a trained human mind, making it an extremely inexpensive, completely passive collection tool.
Section 6, the Legacy of Stargate.
So the natural question is, if this worked, why aren't psychic spies a publicly acknowledged branch of the military today? Well, in 1995, the CIA contracted an independent evaluation of the Stargate program. That report ultimately concluded that the project should be terminated. Why? Because the intelligence gathered through remote viewing was often deemed just too vague and too ambiguous to be reliable, actionable intel. It was practically impossible to separate a viewer's actual psychic visions from their own imagination or just stray thoughts.
Yet surprisingly, an independent statistician named Jessica Utz, who analyzed the raw data, calculated that the government psychics were actually accurate about 15% of the time. Now, while you probably wouldn't want to base a massive military strike on a 15% chance, from a purely statistical standpoint, a 15% success rate for pulling highly classified information completely out of thin air is far, far above random chance.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. We've seen the official reports, we've walked through the quantum physics of holograms, and we've looked at the 15% anomaly. So, does the declassified gateway report in Project Stargate actually prove that the human mind is a laser capable of transcending physical reality? Or was this entire multi-decade endeavor simply a symptom of extreme Cold War paranoia, a time when superpowers were so desperate for any edge that they chased pseudoscience right into the realm of fantasy? Regardless of exactly where you stand on that, the mere fact that the US military spent tens of millions of dollars and decades mapping the absolute outer limits of human consciousness remains one of the most fascinating chapters in modern history. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to keep digging and keep learning.